Well, good morning, everybody. It's great to see you, and especially first service, those of you Longhorn fans that adapted and overcame, right? Long, double overtime, at least a victory this time, right? Pays off, but it's good to see you, and we are going to be answering some questions over the next few weeks. We're starting a new series today in which we're going to look at some of the questions that people have about faith, some of the big barriers that people have to Christianity, and each week we're going to take a different one of these questions and do our best to try to address that. And I've got two goals for this series. One of them is I hope that some of you are here and you're actually asking these questions. We created this church to be a place where people can come regardless of where they are on their spiritual journey and find a safe place to talk about Jesus and to ask questions about faith and do that. So first of all, welcome whoever you are. We're glad that you're here. But secondly, I want to address these questions for those of you who would already identify as Christians because, well, for one thing, I know some of you still wrestle with these questions, whether or not you feel comfortable enough to admit it. We all have some of these questions. But also, I want you to know how to be able to answer these questions for your friends. Because these are some of the things that come up in conversations. Well, yeah, Christianity, but what about this? What about that? When Jesus calls on us who are followers of Christ to go out, he says, and make disciples. He wasn't talking to pastors. He's talking about every Christian being able to give a reason for the hope that they have. And so we're going to be going deep into this in the next few weeks. And this is a series you might want to take some notes on. This is we'll get into the deep weeds at times. But these are important questions, and important questions take, I think, important answers. So this morning, we're going to discuss the question that I think can probably be summed up in one word, and that's the word exclusivity. And to be fair, honestly, it's not a problem that people have just with Christianity, but other religions too. But the problem is, how can you possibly claim that your religion is the only one true religion? That you have the one true faith? I experienced this in an eye-opening way last week. I just got back from Singapore. I was over in the nation of Singapore, which, by the way, those of you that are tired from the game, my body thinks it's 10:30 at night. It's like bedtime now, so I'm fighting jet lag. Like, I wrote this sermon Friday morning from 1 to 3:45 a.m. I was just trying to think, how could I get you guys here at 3 a.m.? Because that's like when I'm in my best. So we might stop for a little nap time in between the message. But anyway, it was a fascinating culture to be in Singapore. We in America think that we have religious pluralism, or that we understand that. In fact, I think sometimes we think we invented religious pluralism. But really, we're fooling ourselves. Take a look at this chart. This is the religious breakdown of America. This is taken from the Gallup polls for 2016. Christians make up 73.7% of the population. The next largest group is the 18.2% that say they don't believe anything, atheists or agnostics or no belief. You tend to hear a lot of hand-wringing in certain media outlets about how Christians are under attack in this country. Quite honestly, that makes about as much sense as the barbecue lobby claiming that vegans are about to run them out of the state of Texas. Come on, let's be realistic. And speaking of, by the way, of eating, do you know what Christianity in America looks like to people that do practice other religions? That chart looks a little like this, actually. Wah, 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 all right, just gobble, gobble, gobble. And so we got to be sensible. Not a lot of true religious pluralism in America. But compare that chart now with the religion chart for Singapore. Okay, this is taken from a 2015 census, so it's pretty apples to apples. Buddhism, that's the yellow, that's the leader with 33.2%. Kind of interesting, the group that doesn't believe anything, that's the piece in black, is equal to the same, it's the same number as in America, 18.2%. But in Singapore, that is statistically tied with Christians. But then there's just so many other colors, right? It's just this explosion of colors there, taste the rainbow. And yet, I think when many of us look at that chart, we get worried about an explosion of a different kind, right? I mean, how can that many religions live together and not kill each other? I think most people today would say that the main barrier to peace in the world is religion, and especially religious exclusivity. There are a flood of books coming out right now talking about this topic and how religion divides us at home and abroad. And I want to start off this morning, and this may surprise some of you because I'm a pastor after all, but I want to start off by agreeing, actually, that religion, generally speaking, has a very strong tendency to divide people and create strife among human beings. In fact, I would go so far as to say that religion tends to create a slippery slope of the heart that can slide all the way down to oppression and even to violence. See, if you tell people that, well, you have the truth and you're saved by performing this truth, that has to lead to a feeling of superiority over other people who are not performing that truth. And superiority leads to separation. You tend to pull away from those impure people, and then separation makes you become unfamiliar with them, and then we fear what we do not know, and so pretty soon you're thinking the worst about them. We're creating stereotypes in our minds, caricatures about them, and that finally leads to a condition in which you either passively ignore or actively participate in the marginalization or the oppression of other groups of people with different beliefs. It starts with not understanding them and then dehumanizing them in your mind and then thinking, well, they deserve this. They're less than, they're something. This is how genocides are birthed. You see that all throughout history. You can see it in the world today. Current events. I don't have to take our time to list them out. So realizing the troubling nature of religion, the question is, what do we do about it? What do we do about this? And there have been several attempts in modern society to deal with this issue. One of them, and by the way, neither of these have really worked, but one of them has been to try to simply do away with religion. On the more passive side, the academic community has for decades been talking about, hoping for, preaching about really the fact that religion is just going to diminish and maybe even disappear. As we evolve, this is kind of prevalent view in Western Europe, that as human beings evolve and get more technologically advanced and get more educated, we're just not going to need religion anymore. We're going to work our way out of that as a species. That was the theory, that religion would just matter less and less until eventually it dies out altogether. But that has not happened at all. Not at all. In fact, almost all major world religions are growing, and some of them are growing very, very fast. Now, as a Christian minister, I know my own statistics better than others, so I can just say, in Africa, for instance, it's gone from 9% to almost 50% Christian in 100 years. South Korea has gone from 1% to 45% in 100 years. Everybody believes China is doing something very similar, that's really going to change the world. But nobody's much saying anymore that religion is going to die out or weaken as the world gets more modern and advanced. And that's the reason why some governments then have gotten more aggressive and said, well, we're going to regulate religion. We're going to try to control it. But the irony is that the more you try to control religion, all it does is make it grow. You persecute religion and it grows more and more and more. A perfect example of this is how the communists took over China in the 1940s. And one of the first things they did was they kicked out all the Western missionaries. So they thought, here we go, we got rid of all the Christian missionaries, that'll be the end of Christianity. Absolutely not. All it did was make Christianity more indigenous to the Chinese culture, and it spread even more. The New York Times reports that although China bans foreign missionaries and sometimes harasses and imprisons Christians, especially in rural areas, Christianity is booming in China. There were just over 500,000 baptized Christians when they kicked out all the missionaries, when the communist crackdown occurred. Today, estimates range up to 130 million Chinese Christians. It's expected by 2040, I think, to be 280 million, which is as many people as there are in the United States. The more you try to stamp out or control religion, the more it grows. There's just something about the human individual who is a spiritual, has a spiritual nature to them and innately spiritual about the human condition. So that's not working. So today we see another answer, another strategy to try to weaken the effect of religion, and that is to allow for it, but to make it less relevant. Emphasize it as more of a hobby. You know, believe what you want, but you just keep it to yourself. Keep it out of the public realm. And the main tool in this strategy is to try to get everybody to agree that all religions are equally valid paths to God. That you won't then really try to convert anybody to your religion. There won't be any conflict. And people say this all the time. I would say that this is the currently the secular answer to religion. Believe whatever you want. Hey, let a million religious flowers bloom. Have at it. Just don't say that yours is the only true flower, because it's arrogant and unloving to think that you are right and everyone else is wrong. But I'm going to argue that the latest secular answer to religion, it won't work either. And the reason for it is that it's actually the same problem as the problem that they are addressing. Because when they insist that all religions are the same, that in itself is actually an arrogant and unloving position. They have the same issue that they're accusing other people of faith of having. So what do I mean by that? Let me show it this way. Have you ever heard the illustration of the blind man and the elephant? You ever hear this? When I have these conversations, I've heard this brought up a number of times. But the illustration goes like this. You imagine there's a number of blind men, and they're walking and they stumble across an elephant. Now, first of all, who's let these blind guys wander around in the jungle? You know, that sounds dangerous, but you can't think about it too much. But they stumble across this elephant, and each one of them gets hold of a different part of the elephant. And somehow, miraculously, the elephant stands there and lets them, molest him instead of just stomping him into the dust. But again, you can't think too strongly about it. But they begin to discuss it, and the one person who has hold of its trunk says, elephants are long, flexible creatures. And the other one has hold of its feet and go, no, you have no idea what you're talking about. Elephants are short and stout and thick. And another one's pressed against the side. And he says, you guys are crazy. Elephants are long and flat and rough. And the other one's got the tail, and on and on it goes. The idea being that they're going to argue each other about the nature of elephants, but we know that the reality is that all of them are right and all of them are wrong. They all grasp a part of the reality of the elephant, but none of them can see the whole picture, and therefore none of them should say that they have exclusive knowledge of the elephant. And so the illustration concludes, religions are all the same. All religions see part of spiritual reality, but no one can see the whole. And therefore, no religion should insist that they have the whole truth. Now, doesn't that sound enlightened? Sounds very enlightened. But let me suggest something to you. Do you realize the only way that we can know that none of those fellows had a hold of the grasp of the whole elephant is actually if we can see the whole elephant, right? If we can see the elephant as a whole. The only way you can tell this story is if you saw the whole thing laid out before you. The only way you can judge these blind guys is if you can actually see. And so the only way that you can possibly know that all religions only see part of the truth is if you assume that you see all of the truth. See, it's the only way you could know that. You have to claim that you have the whole truth, which is the very thing you're saying nobody's got. And so can you see how incredibly arrogant and imperialistic actually it is to say all religions are equal? It appears to be humble, but it's actually quite hypocritical. In Singapore, I visited, there was this one street that right behind our hotel that had a big Catholic church, a Hindu temple, a Buddhist temple, and then a Muslim mosque, thank you, all within about a 4-block region of each other. Now, if you went to everyone and said, you guys all believe the same thing, it's actually incredibly arrogant. It's a colonial mindset. See, it appears to be humble, and it's actually incredibly hypocritical. What gives you this high vantage point in which you can judge all the religions of the world? See, so when you say that nobody has a superior take on spiritual reality, you see, that is a superior take on spiritual reality. And when you say no one should try to convert anyone else to believe their view of reality, that is a view of reality that you are trying to convert other people to believe. So it just doesn't work. This view of religion is never going to work because it's based ultimately on a falsehood, and you cannot fool people forever. The ultimate problem with it is an arrogance. And arrogance is a heart problem. It's not just a truth problem. You can't fix arrogance by trying to create a world in which there's religious uncertainty. In fact, the Bible says arrogance is a much bigger barrier to God than incorrect opinions. This is Proverbs 3:34. Could we just read this out loud together? Would you mind doing that with me? Let's just say it out loud. Here we go. Ready? 1, 2, 3. God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble. Notice it doesn't say God opposes those with incorrect opinions about himself. Actually, the danger is closed, proud, self-sufficient hearts. And of course, the problem is the prouder my heart is, the less able I am to recognize that my heart is proud. And that is not a secular issue alone. This is true of Christians as well. To be truthful, some of the most arrogant, smug, judgmental, exclusive, self-righteous, cranky attitudes I've ever come in contact with have been with Christians. You know how I know that? Well, because I know a lot of Christians, and because I also own a mirror, and I look into this mirror and see one getting ready every morning. It's a very big mirror, and she's standing right next to me. No, it's in me. All of that arrogance is swimming around in me. So what I need is not an enlightened secular viewpoint, but also what I need is not a religion, not even Christianity. I need somebody who has the power to change a heart. And that brings me to Jesus and actually to his exclusive claims. That's right. Jesus made exclusive claims, and he made lots of them. Anybody who tells you that Jesus never claimed to be divine or never claimed these things, that was something his followers did later on, I'm telling you, they've never read the Gospels. I could go down the list, but they're all over the place. Maybe the biggest offender is John 14:6. Jesus is talking about heaven when he says this: I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. Now you can slice that 1,000 ways, but I call that exclusive. Jesus made exclusive claims. That's why they killed him. Not because he was, just this nice teacher. No. He was making these exclusive claims. They were offensive. Well, how awful, right? But listen, can we be real? Everybody has a take on spiritual reality which is based on some kind of faith-based assumption. Even secular people, as we've seen, it's based on some kind of faith. Everybody thinks their take on spiritual reality is better, and that the world would be a better place if everybody believed what they believed. And therefore, everybody has got a set of exclusive beliefs. Everybody has a set of exclusive beliefs. And because of that, I want to present to you that what really matters is not who has exclusive beliefs and who doesn't. That's just a wash. But which set of exclusive beliefs can produce loving, inclusive, reconciling, peaceful behavior. And I recognize the slippery slope of religious exclusivity. I absolutely do. And I think we would all admit that we want peace, that what we want is peace in the world. And so I want to talk to you about what I believe in my heart is the one strategy that will heal religious divisiveness and violence that actually will work. And so what's the strategy? It's actually to look at the things about the Christian gospel that are unique to Christianity and different from all the other religions, because they are the things that will empower you to become agents of peace and reconciliation in the world. Now, I know that's very counterintuitive in a place like Austin. See, most people would say, if you want to be a Christian, okay, be a Christian, but don't stress what's different about you and other religions. That's just going to lead to conflict. No. Just talk about what you have in common. Don't stress what's different. Stress what we have in common. But I would like to say that, well, of course, Christianity has a lot in common with other religions, but those aren't the features that will turn you into an agent of reconciliation for the world. Let me show you. And again, I know this is counterintuitive, but at the heart, the gospel is a bit upside down to our way of thinking. But let me show you three things that are unique and distinct to Christianity apart from other religions. And then I'm going to come back and I'm going to show you how that when you take those three things into your heart, not just head knowledge, not just creedal knowledge, but when you let it get into your heart and transform you, that will turn you into an agent of peace and reconciliation in the world. Okay? And we're going to pull all three of these from the 4th chapter of the letter of 1 John. There's the Bible, the New Testament starts with 4 books, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. The guy that wrote the Gospel of John wrote some other letters, creatively called 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John. And so this is from 1 John. So let's look at, first of all, the origin of Jesus' salvation. Okay? 1 John 1, 2 talks about judging between true and false religions. And it says, this is how you can recognize the Spirit of God. Every spirit that acknowledges that Jesus Christ has come in the flesh is from God. Now, the first thing I want to point out in this language that's very important, it says Jesus has come. Didn't say he was born. Of course, he was born too. But to say he has come means that he was somewhere else before he came here. Right? If I say, where did you come from? That implies that you lived someplace else before you lived here. And this is an implicit claim that Jesus made explicitly in other places, both the letters and in the Gospel of John. And this is where every other religion says that their founder was a human being, okay, maybe a super wise human being, maybe a super enlightened human being. But in Jesus Christ, God comes into the world. Okay, God. This is the divinity claim that Jesus claims, that the Gospels claim, that Jesus is not just the Son of God, but that Jesus is God himself. So that's the first part, is the divinity. Secondly, though, we see the purpose of Jesus' salvation. And notice again that same verse, but look at verse 2. It also says that when Jesus came, he came how? In the flesh. Why put it like that? Why is that important? It's always talking about Jesus coming in the flesh. Because that's another area where Christianity is different than other world religions. Other religions see the purpose of salvation as actually to liberate you from the flesh, to escape it. The flesh, the physical world, is the problem. Some religions say that the physical world is just an illusion and that you're liberated from it when you awaken your conscience to realize the divine mystical truth of the spirit world. This is mainly in Eastern religions. That's the majority of what you see in Singapore. There was this idea. Now, Western religions tend to say, well, no, the flesh is real, but it's bad. Spirit good, body bad. And through morality and spiritual experience, you can escape the bad, escape the physical, and go to heaven. But see, all the other religions say the purpose of salvation is to escape this nasty world and go to heaven where everything's fine. Go to nirvana, go to enlightenment, whatever you want to call it. You may even think that's what Christianity teaches, but I am telling you that is a false understanding of the Christian faith. Actually, it has its roots in the first great heresy of the Christian church, something called Gnosticism. Gnosticism taught that there was this secret wisdom, that Jesus was really only a spirit, that Jesus was untainted by fallen human flesh. But the New Testament goes to great lengths to demonstrate that at the birth of Jesus, Jesus had a physical body. God had a physical body. And at the resurrection of Jesus, this is the key to the resurrection, we see that the salvation of God is not to escape the body, but to redeem the body. The gospel writers stress over and over again that Jesus had a physical body when he came out of the tomb. This is why several times they make it a point to say Jesus ate. He ate food. A ghost doesn't eat. Jesus ate. This is why they have Thomas, right, putting his hands in his side. You remember that story, Doubting Thomas? He's touching the physical body of Jesus. It's a new and better body, to be sure, but it's still a body. And the same is true about the physical world. Jesus' salvation is not to escape this world, but to renew and redeem the physical world. Okay, the material world. Get rid of death, get rid of disease, get rid of poverty, get rid of injustice. Fix everything that is broken about this world. Vinath Ramachandra is a Sri Lankan Christian writer, and he says something very amazing about Christian salvation. Now, this is a guy who lives in that culture, in that Eastern culture where Christianity is not, the majority religion. And he says biblical salvation lies not in an escape from this world, but the transformation of this world. You will not find the hope for this physical world in any of the religious systems or philosophies of humankind. The biblical vision is unique. That is why when some say there is salvation in other faiths too, I ask them, what salvation are you talking about? No faith holds out the promise of eternal salvation for the world, the ordinary world, that the cross and resurrection of Jesus do. So that's the second unique thing. First unique thing about Christianity is that Jesus is God, not just a human prophet. The second unique thing is that the purpose of salvation is the transformation of the material world. That's what the resurrection is all about. But then the third thing that's unique about Christianity is the method of Jesus' salvation. That's the concept of grace. I cannot stress enough the importance of grace to the Christian faith. In every other religious system, we're told that if you want to be saved, you have to perform the truth, which means in a variety of ways to do that. But you have to love God, love other people, you have to love your neighbor, and as God sees you doing these things and loving these things, then God will bless you and save you. But I'm going to tell you, that is not what the gospel says at all. Not at all. Anyone who teaches you that is teaching you a false understanding of Christianity. Look again at 1 John. 1 John 4:10 says this. This is love. Not that we love God, but that He loved us and sent His Son as an atoning sacrifice for our sins. See, God comes and sacrificially pours Himself out and suffers for people who don't love Him, who aren't good, who aren't loving one another. Jesus is not just mainly a teacher who's come to tell us how we should live so that in living right we might be saved. No, Jesus is a Savior who comes and lives the life we should have lived and died the death we should have died in our place. On the cross, the gospel teaches that Jesus paid the penalty for sins so that non-loving, non-virtuous, non-performers of the truth, like me, can be saved by radical grace. Every other religion in the world is spelled D-O. Do what you have to do. Christianity alone is spelled D-O-N-E. It's all about what Jesus has already done for you. Okay? So those are the three things that are really unique about the Christian faith. Jesus' divinity, the physical resurrection, and grace. Now, I want you to see how radically counterintuitive this is. Because again, our world says, hey, let's not talk about doctrine. Let's not talk about Jesus' divinity and His resurrection. Those things divide. Let's just talk about the good stuff He taught. Like love one another. That's great. We can all talk about love. But I'm telling you, it won't work. It can't, because you try to love people apart from the power of the gospel. You'll love them so much you'll wind up killing them. Okay, look at the Crusades. I'm going to love this spear right through your belly, you infidel. This is the dynamic that we get to when religion is separated from the truth of the gospel. You got to read the text, and the text says, unless your religious impulses, unless because of God's Spirit moving in you, you confess the distinctives of Christianity, your religious impulse might actually enslave you and turn you to hate these other people that, in the very name of loving them. But it's these very distinctives that will, if we will take them into the center of our being, that will turn us into the very thing that the world most desperately needs. The world does not need any more arrogant, narrow-minded, bitter, hateful, violent religious people, including Christians. Okay? What the world needs are agents of peace and reconciliation. And these distinctives will make you one. Okay, how so? Let's go back through each of them real quick, and then we're done. And we're going to do it Quentin Tarantino style. We're going to start at the end and go to the beginning. All right, so we'll start with grace and work our way back up. So starting with grace, the gospel says that you're not saved by your performance. In religion, you're saved by your performance, and that's what we said creates the slippery slope. If you believe you're saved because you've earned it, then you've got to feel superior to other people. You feel that you are better than others, and that can lead to oppression. Okay, moralism leads to oppression. But I want you to know, if you're a modern, sophisticated person, secularism isn't much help either. Because have you noticed that secularists are every bit as self-righteous as moralists? Right? They say, I'm the enlightened person. And you know, primitive religious ignoramuses over here. Right? You and your kind are the problem with the world. Of course, the moralist is looking at the secularist, and they're saying, you dirty secularists, you're the problem with the world. You know, dogs and cats living together, mass hysteria. So you have these divides. Each group looks down their noses at the other. But the gospel is the only faith system I know of that leads you to expect that people who do not believe what you believe will actually be better people than you are. What? Yes. Because, listen, the gospel says you're not saved because you're wise. You're not saved because you're good. You're not saved because you're virtuous. You're not saved because you're performing the truth. You're saved because Jesus performed the truth, and you can't get salvation until you admit that you're not better than anybody else, and in fact that you are a sinner and in need of grace. And therefore the gospel leads you to believe that the people who don't agree with you could be and probably are better people than you. Wiser, nicer, more disciplined, more self-controlled, kinder, less likely to fly off the handle. Every other religious system leads you to believe that you're better than those that don't believe the right things. But the gospel says that if you really get hold of grace, if you really take it inside of you, it humbles you, and you won't think you're better than anybody else. It humbles you. I don't know any other religious system that does that. Secondly, the resurrection. If religions say this world doesn't matter, it's all going straight to hell, all that matters is heaven, all that matters is the afterlife, or all that matters is reaching nirvana. See, if you believe that, and most religions teach a version of that, then all that really matters is you convert more people to your tribe. You just get more people into the lifeboats before the ship sinks, and who cares because the world's going to hell anyway. But the purpose of salvation, according to the Bible, is a new heavens and a new earth. Okay? It's a transformed world with no poverty, no disease, no suffering. Well, if that's the case, then you'll be working with God. You're working to make this world a good world. This is the kind of salvation that leads to there's a place in Jeremiah 29. It's an Old Testament prophet that says that God says to the children of Israel, I want you to go into the pagan city of Babylon, and I want you to seek the peace of the city. I want you to work for its good. I know that city killed and enslaved your people, but I want you to go there and I want you to bless them. I want you to work for their blessing. And the gospel view of salvation doesn't just humble you before people who don't believe like you do, but it says even more, serve them. See, serve the city. Our mission statement at Southwest Family says that we exist to make Austin and the world a better place. We want to make Austin a great city for everyone to live in, regardless of whether they believe like we do. Because that's what God is doing. He's working for a new heaven and a new earth. He's bringing new things, a new life to dead things. That's what the resurrection is. But the last of all, the distinction of divinity. Jesus is not just a good teacher, not a prophet. He's God come in the flesh. Now, a lot of people I think would say, okay, Anthony, now at this point, all right, I guess I can kind of see how, the grace could make you a humble person. The resurrection could make you serve the world. But if you really believe Jesus is God, that's got to lead to self-righteousness, right? Aren't you going to say, oh, you belong to another religion, huh? Well, your founder was just a prophet, but my founder was God, right? Your founder was just some good teacher, some dead prophet, but my founder is God Almighty. Won't that lead to superiority? Well, all I can say is it didn't. Let me give you just one of the great paradoxes of history. When Christianity began to grow in the very early days, the Greeks and the Romans both had what we would consider an inclusive theology. They said, everybody's got a God. Right? You got your God, you got your God, they got their God. Everybody's got their God. Greco-Roman paganism was totally pluralistic, which seems very inclusive, doesn't it? Seems inclusive. And then along comes Christians, and they say, no, Jesus is Lord of all. And that seems terribly exclusive. So paganism is inclusive. Christianity is exclusive. And yet the simple fact of history is that Christianity created the single most inclusive community in the history of the world up until that point. Nobody had ever seen anything like it. The Romans and the Greeks did not mix the classes, the economic stratas, the way the Christians did. The Jews didn't mix the races the way the Christians did. Why would such an exclusive belief that Jesus is God, that He is the way, the truth, the life, why would that lead to the most inclusive, peace-loving behavior? Humble behavior. Let's think about it. If Jesus isn't some great guy, but He is God in the flesh, then what do we see in the picture of Jesus? What do we see in the picture of this God? Is this Zeus on a mountaintop hurling lightning bolts at people that don't believe the right way? No. What does this God do? He hangs on a cross, right? Loving people who don't love him back, forgiving people who are abusing him, sacrificially serving people who oppose him. See? And when those early Christians took that into the very center of their being, how could they oppress anybody else? How could they be cruel to anybody at all? They couldn't be. And if you take that into the center of your being, you can't be either. Everyone's got an exclusive set of beliefs, and Christianity is no exception. But which set of beliefs leads to morally inclusive behavior? Take moralistic religion into the center of your life, and you will feel superior to those dirty, wicked secularists. Take secularism into the center of life, and you will feel superior to all those stupid, moralistic, religious Pharisees. But take the gospel of Jesus Christ into the center of your being, and you will be humbled before people who don't believe what you believe. You'll seek to serve people who don't believe what you believe. And you'll know that a man who loves people who don't love him back is what your whole life is built on. Do you want this incredible force to be released into the world? I hope you do. Can you see that's what we need? Well, here's how you do it. If you believe the gospel, believe it even more deeply. Believe it more deeply than you ever have before. And if you say this morning, Anthony, well, that would be great if that's what Christianity looked like. But that's not what I see. You know what? You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. We have too many unbelieving believers in the world today. One, I like to say part of our mission at South, this is not in our official mission statement, but part of what we do is reaching Christians for Christ. Too many of us have abandoned the true gospel for a rigid moralism. We turn Christianity into just another set of rules, another status to be held. I'm going to do a message, it's up here somewhere, on Halloween weekend about all of the injustice that the church has done over the years. That's real, that's true. We have to own that. But that doesn't make the gospel invalid. That's just the challenge of keeping a jewel sparkling in a dry and dusty world. The reality is, look, this is the Bible. The New Testament, the first 4 books of the New Testament lay out the gospel. And then the rest of it continually pleads with people, hey, don't forget the gospel. Look at this. Listen to what Paul says to the church in Galatia. Galatians chapter 1. I'm astonished that you are so quickly deserting the one who called you to live in the grace of Christ and are turning to a different gospel, which is really no gospel at all. Evidently, some people are throwing you into confusion and are trying to pervert the gospel of Christ. It's apparently not that difficult to lose sight of the true gospel. So, if you believe the gospel, believe it some more. And if you don't believe the gospel, first of all, would you forgive those of us who do for not making it more appealing to you? We're supposed to, if we would live our lives like this man on the cross, that would be more attractional. It was more attractional in the first century. In the early days when people saw the church sacrificing for pagans, laying down their lives for people that didn't believe like they believed. So forgive us, but more important, could I suggest, don't really look at us. Look at Jesus. Would you consider what it would mean if that man on the cross, saying what he said, doing what he did, what that could mean for your life, what that could mean for our world if it were true? And one final word on the exclusivity of Christianity. It's a shame I even have to say this, but I do. Jesus will never ask you to kill for him. But he might just ask you to die for him. Because that's what it takes to be an agent of peace and love in our broken world. Let's pray. Father God, we've all got a lot of questions. And the reality is, I will never be able to, no one will ever be able to argue anyone into faith in Jesus Christ. That has to be received. But it's not a blind faith. It's not a dumb faith. but it comes by looking at Jesus and who He is. And God, I do pray that you would help those of us who call ourselves Christians, that we would see that the stakes are so high, that we need to live a life of the true gospel to show the world what that looks like, because we're your ambassadors. You've called us to be good representatives. It's not that we're going to earn our way into heaven. Not a one of us is. Not a one of us can be equal to the standard that you lay out for us. That happens in your Son, Jesus Christ. He did it for us. And because of that, we get grace. And people that receive grace should be thankful people. And many times we're not. And so God, forgive us of that. Help us. Those of us that believe the gospel to believe it more. But God, I pray for those that might be in this room that don't believe. And a part of it is because of what they've seen in this world. Maybe what they've seen in this church. Maybe what they've seen in this pastor. But God, I pray that you would help them to do what I have to do. What all of us have to do. Which is to turn our eyes to Jesus. Father, I believe that when we see what Jesus did for us, and God, sometimes you have to break in. St. Paul, you just showed up in a way that he could not argue with. You were there. And then he asked his questions on the back end, and he began to figure those things out. But God, I pray that we would have a radical encounter with your Son, Jesus Christ, because he is still alive. He is still moving in the world through his Spirit. And God, over these weeks, it's not to prove that we have all the answers. We don't. What we have is faith. What we have is relationship with you. And I pray that that would be possible in the lives of people today. That they would come to the place today, in the coming weeks, but at some point they would come to the place where they say, God, I realize that I've been trying to do this on my own. And I want what Jesus did for me on the cross. I want that to be applied to my life. And so God, I ask you, forgive me for trying to be my own God, and I want to let you be in charge. And I don't even know what all that looks like yet, but I'm willing to step out in faith and to follow you because I believe Jesus is the Son of God. I believe he died on that cross. And I believe that he was raised from the dead so that one day I would be too. This whole world would be restored. Jesus, that's what we all want. We want what you want, which is for your kingdom to come on earth as it is in heaven. Thank you, Jesus, for making that possible for us. In your name we pray. Amen. This today, and listen, we want this to be a dialogue, not just a conversation. I realize you've been sitting through a 40-minute conversation or a monologue, and it's hard to do feedback here. It's hard to, I got a question. Okay. Now, at the end of the series, we're going to do a Q&A. Okay, the last